morning. I'm Maiki Oreta, and you're watching Business 360, where we break down the numbers, connect the dots, and give you the developments and the insights you need to navigate, adapt, and lead. Let's dive right in. The government plans to borrow 735 billion pesos from the domestic market in the second quarter, a larger program that could affect borrowing costs and private sector access to credit. Vice President Sara Duterte and other family members attempt to visit former President Rodrigo Duterte in The Hague, with the visit taking place on the eve of his 80th birthday. And in a move that could rattle global trade, the United States suspends its contributions to the World Trade Organization, potentially undermining the body's role as a global trade umpire. Let's take a look at how financial markets performed overnight as investors reacted to fresh trade tensions from Washington. All three major indexes on Wall Street closed lower on Thursday, weighed down by U.S. President Donald Trump's latest tariff announcement, which sent shares of General Motors and Ford into the red. Trump unveiled a plan to slap a 25% tariff on imported cars and light trucks starting April 3, with a separate duty on auto parts taking effect on May 3. He also teased a wave of reciprocal tariffs, though he hinted there may still be room for negotiation.
Yeah, markets today, frankly, look similar to what we saw yesterday, and it has, with increasingly frequency in the last couple of weeks, where it's just a lot of flip-flopping. It's a reversal day. Futures looked stronger in the morning, and it just kind of slowly drained out throughout the end of the day. Gold has got a bid, as has Bitcoin, which is kind of interesting. But again, it's generally seeing a lot of investors, repricing growth, repricing the AI trade, starting to favor more defensive stocks. And again, all of this is, directly tied to concerns about what the tariffs are going to look like, when and if they're going to, come in earlier, or if April 2nd is going to be the so-called Liberation Day. I joked to an investor earlier this morning that, markets don't like tariffs, markets don't like uncertainty, and markets hate tariff uncertainty. And I think that's just what we're seeing.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 0.4%. The S&P 500 lost 0.3%, while the Nasdaq Composite dropped 0.5%. Over in Europe, the UK's FTSE 100 closed lower by 0.3%. Germany's DAX lower by 0.7%, and France's CAC 40 lower by 0.5%. The sell-off reflects growing concern over disruptions in global supply chains, especially for the auto sector. For Philippine businesses exposed to manufacturing or exports, any escalation in tariffs could influence trade flows, input costs, and market sentiment in the weeks ahead. The national government is set to borrow over 735 billion pesos from the domestic market in the second quarter, a move closely watched by investors, banks, and corporates looking to gauge liquidity conditions and interest rate trends. The Bureau of Treasury says it plans to raise 325 billion pesos in treasury bills and 410 billion pesos in treasury bonds. The borrowing program is 15% higher than the first quarter's 629 billion peso target, and up 3% from the 712 billion pesos actually raised in that period. In April alone, the government plans to borrow 245 billion pesos, split between 125 billion pesos in T-bills and 120 billion pesos in T-bonds. This signals sustained demand for domestic capital, with implications for banks' lending capacity, corporate fundraising plans, and overall market yields. The country's financial system remains stable, a crucial signal for Philippine businesses and investors looking for confidence amid global volatility. In its latest financial stability report, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas says that the system is resilient, but warns that moderate risks need to be closely watched. Among the key concerns, escalating geopolitical tensions, changing monetary policies in major economies, and potential market reactions to the U.S. presidential elections. The central bank says these global developments could affect capital flows, credit conditions, and business sentiment, with implications for funding costs, investments, and overall economic stability in the Philippines. The government is moving closer to rolling out a long-awaited policy to boost local vehicle manufacturing, with the joint administrative order for its incentives program expected to be released by April. Board of Investments Executive Director Maria Corazon Halili de Chosa says the administrative order for the automotive industry for Competitiveness Enhancement Program, or ICEP, is in its final stages. The policy is being crafted by the BOI, Department of Finance, and Department of Budget and Management, and was originally targeted for completion by mid-March. Industry stakeholders are closely monitoring this measure as it could shape investment flows, supply chain strategies, and the Philippines' competitiveness in regional automotive manufacturing, a potential win for local suppliers and global partners looking to expand into Southeast Asia. The Department of Trade and Industry says the Philippines is unlikely to be hit by potential reciprocal tariffs under U.S. President Donald Trump, a positive signal for exporters and manufacturers with significant ties to the American market. DTI Secretary Maria Cristina Roque cites strong Philippine-U.S. relations and says the country's trade deficit with the U.S. is minimal, making it less likely to be targeted in any trade measures. Data from Tradeline Philippines shows total trade between the two countries reached $20.3 billion last year. For Philippine businesses, especially in exports, electronics, and BPO, maintaining a stable trade relationship with the U.S. remains crucial for revenue flows and growth strategies. The Department of Trade and Industry is partnering with the Development Bank of the Philippines, GCash, and Maya to roll out a 500 million peso lending program for micro-enterprises, a move aimed at boosting financial access for the country's smallest but most vital business operators. DTI Secretary Cristina Roque says the program will primarily target sari-sari stores and market vendors, which form the backbone of many local communities and supply chains. Speaking at the Asian SME Forum 2025, Roque says a memorandum of understanding is now being finalized and is expected to be signed by the end of this month or early April. The incentive will be piloted in Cebu, given its high concentration of micro-retailers. For the Philippine business sector, this program signals growing private-public collaboration to drive financial inclusion, digitalization, and grassroots-level economic growth. We're taking a quick break. Please stay with us as we dive deep into the numbers and the narratives that matter most to your bottom line. Welcome back. Let's take a look at how Asian markets are faring this Friday morning. Right now, Japan's Nikkei 225 is sharply in the red, lower by over 2%, down by 2.2% in early trade. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index is in the green, higher by just 0.2%. Shanghai's Composite in the red, lower by 0.3%. And Singapore's Straits Times Index flat with a downward bias, lower by a little less than 0.1%. Now, taking a look at our market, local shares snapped a one-day rebound Thursday, closing lower amid weak market sentiment and negative cues from overseas. The main gauge dropped 0.4% to 61.40. Now let's take a look at how the equities market is doing today. As of 10:12 this morning, the PSE index is in the red, slightly down by 0.1% to 61.36. The broader all shares in the red as well by about as much, down by a little less than 0.1% to 36.59. As for the subsectors, the financials, the property, services, and mining and oil counters are in the green, while the industrial and holding firms are in the red. And at the foreign exchange market, let's take a look at the figures. The peso opened at 57.37 from its previous close of 57.37, so unchanged at the foreign exchange market. Now, the Securities and Exchange Commission is holding the line on its 20% minimum public ownership requirement for companies aiming to list on the Philippine Stock Exchange, a move that reinforces its push for a more robust and investor-friendly market. The SEC says the rule is designed to support market liquidity, price discovery, and stronger corporate governance, key elements that matter to both retail and institutional investors. While the Commission welcomes more initial public offerings, it stresses that regulatory safeguards remain in place to protect the market's integrity. For Philippine business, this policy signals a continued emphasis on good governance, investor confidence, and capital market depth, all critical to long-term economic growth. Globe Telecom strikes a strategic joint venture with Singapore-based NCSI Holdings, signaling a major move to scale its IT services arm and tap into global markets. The deal involves the sale of a 51% stake in Globe subsidiary Yondu Incorporated to NCSI. Under the agreement, NCSI will acquire existing shares from Globe and subscribe to new shares in Yondu, resulting in majority ownership for NCSI, while Globe retains a 49% stake. Globe President and CEO Ernest Cu says the partnership will unlock global opportunities and enable Yondu to deliver more impactful IT solutions on a broader scale. For the Philippines tech and business sector, this deal highlights growing cross-border collaborations and the rising value of homegrown digital firms in the regional tech landscape. Vice President Sara Duterte travels to The Hague in an attempt to visit her detained father, former President Rodrigo Duterte, just hours before his 80th birthday. The unannounced visit comes amid growing international attention on the Philippines' role in global justice proceedings. The NC's at the forefront anchor, attorney Karen Jimeno, is on the ground in The Hague and caught up with the Vice President outside the detention facility.
Hindi ko po nakausap si Pangulong Duterte ngayong araw na ito. Nandito lang po kami para kunin yung mga gamit na pinapakuha na hiningi namin na kunin kasi hindi na siya mapasok doon sa loob ng kwarto ni Pangulong Duterte. Kaya binalik nila sa amin yung mga gamit para mag-inventaryo at itago para kay Pangulong Duterte.
Okay naman siya?
Opo. Hindi po kami nagkita ngayon, araw na ito. Opo. Nandito lang kami para kunin yung gamit po ni Pangulo Duterte.
Not long after, other family members also arrived to make their own attempt to visit the former president. Several personal items reportedly not allowed inside the detention facility were later seen being retrieved from the premises. The attempted visits underscore the spotlight on Duterte's detention, with ongoing legal proceedings abroad now carrying broader implications for Philippine politics, diplomacy, and future accountability on the global stage. With former President Rodrigo Duterte's 80th birthday nearing, the Metropolitan Manila Development Authority says it's prepared to handle traffic in case rallies or mass gatherings take place in the capital. MMDA Chairperson Romando Artes says protests will be allowed as long as they do not obstruct traffic or disrupt public order. He urged participants to conduct programs peacefully and be mindful of the rights of others. Former President Duterte remains in detention in The Hague, facing allegations of crimes against humanity before international courts. Any potential rallies around this high-profile case could test the government's ability to balance civil liberty and public expression while maintaining order on the ground, all against the backdrop of a case that has global implications. Now, Senate committee led by Senator Amy Marcos is questioning the legality of former President Rodrigo Duterte's arrest by the International Criminal Court, saying there were violations of due process and a lack of cooperation requirements under Philippine law. The committee argues that without a red notice from Interpol or a local arrest warrant, the Philippines was under no legal obligation to turn Duterte over to the ICC. It also cites glaring rights violations, claiming Duterte should have faced proceedings in local courts. The report comes just days after Senator Amy Marcos withdrew herself from her brother's political party.
Mistulang nagtatago
ang ating gobyerno ng mahahalagang katotohanan. At hindi ko talaga matanggap, kaya't kinakailangan malaman natin at hayaan na lamang ako na malaya na magsiyasat. Hindi namin nauwi yung tatay kong buhay. Sana ito naman matagumpay tayo, maiuwi si Presidente Duterte. Tulad ng ama ko pareho nilang sinasabi, haharap ako sa anumang kaso at paglilitis sa Pilipinas.
Malacanang says that the committee's findings were expected. Palace Press Officer Claire Castro adds that President Marcos is unbothered by the developments involving his sister.
Wala rin po tayong nadinig na anumang hinanakit kung meron man mula sa Pangulo para sa kanyang kapatid.
The Senate report highlights not just legal disagreements on the ICC case, but also signals the early stages of political positioning among key figures ahead of the 2025 midterm elections, where control of Congress and national narratives will be up for grabs. The Philippine National Police is clarifying claims made by Senator Bato de la Rosa that his security detail in Davao was recalled this week, saying there was no new directive involved. The PNP says De La Rosa's escorts were previously recalled and that the action was taken back in January after 2 members of his security team failed to obtain the required COMELEC exemption. Under election rules, candidates or sitting officials need special clearance to retain security details during the election period.
So hindi po totoo yung kumakalat na balita na ngayon lamang po yan inalis. And in fact, nakalimutan marahil banggitin ng ating kagalang-galang na senador na meron pong nakadetail sa kanya na 4 na protective security personnel.
The clarification comes amid heightened political sensitivities ahead of the midterm elections, where narratives around security, protection, and perceived targeting of candidates could shape public perception and campaign strategy. On another front, motorists prepare for longer travel times as the EDSA rehabilitation project kicks off next month. Transport officials are finalizing rerouting plans and alternate road options to manage traffic flow. With EDSA being Metro Manila's main thoroughfare, the repairs are expected to impact commuters, businesses, and daily logistics. Our mobility correspondent, G. Baroga, has the details.
The EDSA rehabilitation project will begin within April, just a slight shift from its original March start. It is expected to be wrapped up before President Bongbong Marcos's term ends. Transportation Chief Vince Dizon and MMDA Chairman Don Ortiz want to assure everyone there is no delay in the project.
Ang mga meetings namin constant. Pero doon mo makikita yung seriousness ng ating Pangulo na talagang siguraduhin na planado to ng tama. Kasi siguro mas kakabahan ng mga kababayan natin kung bigla-bigla na lang namin ginawa to na hindi namin pinagano ng tama.
Masyadong komplikado yung paggawa nitong EDSA na hindi pwedeng bigla-biglaan ang desisyon . Sabi niyo nga, maraming moving parts na hindi pwedeng ito lang kasi may effect sa iba. So kailangan namin pagtama-tamain lahat.
Transport officials are focusing on ways to minimize traffic disruptions as repairs move forward. The DOTR, MMDA, and DPWH are working closely with local government units in Metro Manila to roll out a traffic management plan that will keep things flowing smoothly. Secretary Dizon reassures commuters that the EDSA bus carousel will remain in service during the overhaul, and the MRT-3 will continue to operate as usual. Plus, additional mabuhay lanes will be set up as alternate routes for motorists. According to Secretary Dizon, this is the first time in almost 50 years that EDSA will undergo major repairs.
Baku-bakong daan, hindi pantay-pantay, maraming mga butas-butas sa ibang lugar. And it's not a very comfortable ride for our motorists. So this is really something that we must do.
Pagkatapos naman ito, nakikita natin na may ginhawa dahil hindi na kayo mag-slow down pag may nakita lubak, yung smooth yung karsada, understand kasama drainage na gagawin. So yung pagbaha sa EDSA, mawawala.
Secretary Dizon is asking for a little patience and understanding from drivers and commuters during the project, but he promises that the end result will be a lot more comfortable for everyone. For BNC Mobility, G. Baroga.
We're taking a short break. Business 360 will be right back. Welcome back. In a move that could rattle global trade, the United States suspends its contributions to the World Trade Organization, signaling a deeper shift away from international economic cooperation under President Donald Trump. 3 trade sources confirm the funding pause as the Trump administration pushes to cut government spending and reinforce its America First trade agenda. Washington has repeatedly criticized the WTO, accusing its appellate body of overreaching in trade disputes. The U.S. funding freeze threatens to weaken the WTO's ability to mediate global trade issues, adding uncertainty for export-driven economies like the Philippines and raising risks for businesses that depend on a stable, rule-based trade system. Some global drug makers are rushing to ship medicines to the United States ahead of a potential tariff sweep that could hit pharmaceutical products made in Europe. This comes amid growing concern that U.S. President Donald Trump's expected April 2 tariff announcement may include European-made drugs. At least 2 European-headquartered pharmaceutical firms say they have been expediting shipments to the United States in the recent weeks. Other industry players are reportedly doing the same, seeking to avoid possible supply disruptions or price increases. Any disruption in the global drug supply chain could affect inventories, costs, and access to medicines, with possible ripple effects on local pharmaceutical distributors, healthcare providers, and patients in the Philippines who rely on U.S.-based sources. And that's it for Business 360. I'm Maiki Oreta. Have a good weekend ahead and keep it here on BNC, the Bilyonaryo news channel.